Welcome to Dad Talk today. I'm Jeff Morgan with Melissa Isaac, and today we just heard from Shelley Luther, but now we're going to hear from Shelley's husband, Tim. Tim, I've known you since probably about not quite a year right now.
It's getting close though.
It's getting close, but I remember because you were right up there beside Shelley when they tried to not let her open up her salon, and then also when she went to jail and everything. But Shelley just talked a little bit about you and your struggles seeing your children.
Right.
I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that and what your thoughts were.
You know, I think when we finally, we never really know what we're getting into, but then when you finally get into a divorce and then you start wondering what you're going to do with your kids, and there's sort of this normalcy that everybody sort of expects, that mom's going to get the kids and dad's going to see them on the weekends, and we were just talking about that, even dad's going to pay child support or whatever. It was interesting. So initially my wife had my son, and I was getting him a little bit at the time, but we had to do a lot of work in the court and a lot of work with the judge in order to get a 50-50 split, so not only time but expenses and everything else. And what was interesting to me was that the judge, and what I learned in the court, that there aren't many parents that just agree to that initially, or that it's not even asked for very often. And that surprised me, because I was thinking, why wouldn't you want to split what your children? I understand not all situations are equal, but in the case when somebody wants to,
that's right.
Why they wouldn't do that.
And some of the times too, parents might go talk to attorneys, and the attorney says, you know what, you need to fight for sole custody.
Right.
And so the attorneys actually talk people into this contentious environment, and then the parents end up fighting, and nobody wins. It's a whole lot of money. But can you tell us, what was that experience like for you, just emotionally, having to go through this fight for your son?
It was difficult. And it's funny you mentioned attorneys, because in Texas they call it an amicable divorce. So we all just accept that we're going to do it. Nobody's really angry with one another. But you're right, the attorney all of a sudden turns it into something different. And so then mentally, that puts me in a different frame of mind, put my ex-wife in a different frame of mind, and then you get emotionally sucked into it, and it's draining. It's really hard. My son is wondering, hey, why am I not spending as much time with Dad? And then even when I had time with him, he was conditioned to being at his mom's home more often, so it was a little bit of a struggle there. But it's emotionally it's hard. And it's not just hard on the parents, but it's hard on the kids too, because now something that seemed pretty reasonable all of a sudden has turned into a fight. So
I think the part that gets me is that so here you've been your son's dad, good dad, you've had a strong relationship, and now you go through a divorce, and now all of a sudden, I don't know if you had any accusations made against you, but it's almost like you're no longer the same father.
Right.
Like you now are almost a visiting person, and you get the privilege of visiting, but the obligation of paying.
Right.
And I mean, people forget that dads, when you become a father, a child is yours for life.
Right.
And these courts and the way that they do things, they just tear that apart.
Right.
And I'm sure that, when Shelley was here talking, she said that, I'm sure that as a father, you're like, what do I do? Because you're trying to protect your kids, you want to keep that thing strong, but at the same time, there's turmoil. And Shelley was the one who encouraged
Absolutely.
you.
So, no parent wants to see their child cry, right?
Right.
But children cry. Sometimes it's warranted, sometimes it's not. But when my son was getting dragged into something, and then I'd say, you know what, let's just let this go, because I don't want to do that to him. And she was a strong one that said, no, you got to stick with this. It's going to be okay. You will find a medium or a balance. But it's really hard to do that when your child's looking at you with a tear in his eye and saying, hey, I don't, this doesn't make me feel good. And you're like, I don't want to do this to my child. But at the same time, the whole reason why we went through this situation was for a better life for everybody, including the child. So it's tough. And like I said, you mentioned the courts sort of tear this up. We were lucky to find a judge who is all about the 50-50, hey, I want parents to take equal responsibility. But from what I understand, not all judges are like that, and there's still a lot of family courts that are slighted.
I've been to some of the courts, and I've watched the stuff that has taken place, and even sometimes the judges that are supposedly pro-father judges, there is a bias. And once a judge gets it in his mind that he wants to take revenge on a person, he is hell-bent on doing so despite the evidence. Damn the evidence. I am going to punish this person because I don't like him.
Right.
Yeah,
And-
or they're friends with opposing counsel.
Yeah.
That's I'm a divorce attorney, and that's one of the first things when somebody brings in divorce paperwork, first thing I look at is who's my judge and who's opposing counsel, because
Right.
I can totally dictate. I can't dictate anything, but I can tell my client the direction of the case based upon who the judge is and who the lawyer on the other side.
It's funny you
That's
mentioned
not
that,
justice.
yeah, because the attorney that I initially got, she said, "Oh, this judge is going to be really good for you," and I'm like, "Well, how do you know that?" But
Yeah.
because you don't really know. But then that made me wonder, well, what if she had said, "Hey, this judge is not going to be good for you"?
Yeah.
Like, what would that mean? So now it's in the hands of a person, and exactly what happened to Shelley. She opens that salon, and her case gets put in front of a judge who decides they're going to make an example of
That's
her.
right.
I mean, it's crazy how you think the court is supposed to be something that's neutral. No way.
So let me ask another question here too, because I mean, as a father, you're an entertainer, you've done all of these different things. You saved money, I'm sure, and then all of a sudden, how much money did you have to spend? And I don't want to necessarily get a figure, but this is money that you should have been spending for your child,
Right.
for yourself, or like in Melissa's case, she has the law firm protecting men. She sees men go through this stuff, and she's actually built a house for men that they can meet with their children.
Well, that's
But-
awesome.
Stay there.
Yeah, and I think that there's something, Tim, that men don't want to talk about certain things. There's they don't want to expose their weakness. They want to. Men are supposed to be men, but men still have a heart.
Right.
And men sometimes go through the ringer.
Yeah.
And they're really, in many instances, the attorney bills get racked up, and there's no real reason for any of the stuff to happen. And
Right.
what's being hurt is that your children are being hurt. And I mean, I know with my ex-wife, when she was doing this stuff, she said, "I will destroy everything." And I'm like, that's when I said, I want to save this for my children.
Right.
And I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
So it's interesting because I come from a family that was involved in law enforcement and also spent a lot of time in the court system. So
Right.
attorneys have a right to charge people money for their services.
Right.
There also comes a time though, and so here's what happened. We start with an amicable divorce. Hey, it's going to cost about $10,000 to do all this stuff. Hey, that's no problem. All of a sudden it's no longer amicable, and now we need another $10,000 from you just to get something that we already agreed was going to happen. So now I'm, $20,000 into it. And then, then there's a little bit more. And then COVID hits. And then it's like, now all of a sudden, we're all looking at this and we're in a financial panic because hey, industries are shut down and things like that. Plus we're still taking care of attorneys' bills. I think ultimately, I think it would be great if we could find ways for a lot of that money that's being spent. It sounds like you're already involved in something that's really, really cool. But if we could find ways to get that back to the kids or to families or adults that are struggling with this type of thing. And I know there's always somebody that's willing to do a favor, or somebody's willing to cut this or that. But hey, you know what? When you do well for yourself, or you have to make a decent living, man, a divorce can rip a family apart financially.
Right.
And then so now, and then you look at going down the road. So hey, my son needs some new clothes. Well, instead of just being able to go out and get him whatever he wanted, because I spent my whole life working to save to buy my child whatever I felt like he would need. Now I've got to be a little bit more conservative about it. I need to say, hey, I've got to buy clothes that are maybe a size too big because he's growing like crazy.
Yeah.
I can't afford to just be turning clothes over every couple of months. So it changes the fabric of the family. And the relationship that you have with your child too. All of a sudden financially everything's different.
Yeah.
So it's tough. Yeah.
So anything you want to add, Melissa?
Gosh, we could talk for a long time. I know that, the judge in your family court case was very fair, and the judge in Shelley's case was very much not fair.
Oh,
Made
biased,
an example.
unbelievably biased.
You say want to make an example of her, and I think that's a problem too, that we as, not only as parents, but we as Americans need to recognize that the judiciary is broken. The judiciary is biased, and in some cases, they're bought. So, there's this perception that, Texas, right, you're free in Texas. But you're saying, but then your wife goes to jail. So what are some of the thoughts that you have in terms of the judiciary? How do we address this flip-flopping and bias that exists?
You know, it's interesting. So, depending on where you live in Texas, some areas are a little bit more liberal thinking, some areas obviously more conservative. I think that there needs to be a little bit more accountability when it comes to what's happening, like what's being handed down from the bench. I don't know if that would be attorneys there might be a board, and I know there's already review processes and everything. I just think overall the accountability needs to be a little bit more stringent. And then also, Shelley's case went to the Supreme Court. It went in there on May 8th or 9th. It's still there. What is taking so long to rule on that? So also getting the results back once something's been appealed or moves on to an upper court.
So I'll tell you about with Shelley's case. You know, I actually videotaped the entire thing. It was on YouTube, and I was trying to download it, wouldn't download it. I'm going to get this, right? And then I edited it and I sent it to the judge, and then they pulled but I don't know, that already had it at that point. And I stuck it up on YouTube, and you know what people were saying? You see the way the judge rolled his eyes?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, it was a disaster because the transcript, the lady was like, I'm missing, I can't figure out what you're saying, I don't know what the transcript is saying. But it's the nonverbal stuff that was the belittling, the threat, and that does not get communicated.
Right.
So what are your thoughts about maybe mandatory cameras and audio and video in the courtroom?
It was a big deal for Shelley's case because they brought her in. Initially was not going to be on Zoom. We were able to get it on Zoom.
Yeah.
But then even the judge at certain times commanded them to turn off the camera so that he could say something that he didn't want recorded. So we definitely need to find accountability that manner.
Yeah.
Definitely, because it makes a huge difference when the public can see what is going on in the courtroom. And in that case with that judge, you're right. The way he rolled his eyes, the way he didn't pay attention, his mind was made up before the hearing ever started. And it was obvious visually, although not always audibly. So yeah, big deal.
Absolutely, yeah.
Tim, go ahead.
Tim, thank you so much for talking
Thank you.
with us. We greatly, appreciate your perspective, and we'll be back.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was great.
Yeah, no, thank you.